Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings. Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a weekly podcast from Practical E-Commerce, hosted by entrepreneur Eric Bandholz.
What is going on, Internet? Eric Bandholz back again with another E-Commerce Conversations. Hope all is going well on the other side of the Internet. On the other side of the table from me, Corey.
What's up, man?
What's up?
Excited to be here. This is my first in-person podcast.
There you go. Breaking your in-person podcast virginity. Excited for that. Why don't you tell our listeners who the heck you are?
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Corey Wilks. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and as of 3 years ago, now I do a lot of executive coaching with entrepreneurs, founders, content creators, working around how to build a values-aligned life and business, clarifying what matters, overcoming limiting beliefs, holding you back from that, all that jazz.
All right, executive coaching. What? How are people finding you? Or are you reaching out to people?
It's both. So I write a lot of articles both on my website, corywilksociety.com, and I write for Psychology Today. So I get a lot of views and traffic from that. So usually people find me there, or I've done a couple podcasts that are more prominent. So they find me there. And then I'll also do probably one of my most famous examples is there's a guy's name's Ali Abdal. He's a big YouTuber, an entrepreneur. And a couple of years ago, I didn't know Ali, but he put out this like 45-minute YouTube video about here are the 8 things I'm struggling with in my life and business. And I was like, holy shit, this is exactly what I help people with. So I dropped everything and in a day wrote out like this 20-minute read time article that was a play-by-play of, hey, Ali, I don't know you, but if we work together, here's how I would approach each of these struggles you're currently having. Put it out there, sent it on Twitter, and then enough people shared it that he finally saw it. And a lot of people shared it, even though it was to him, because they found a lot of value in it. Because honestly, like entrepreneurs, we all kind of struggle with a lot of the same things. So it was really applicable to a lot of other people. Ali read it. We ended up working together for about 6 months. And then a lot of good things have happened since then. So some of it is sort of like this permissionless approach of, I see somebody struggling with something and I just send them either a video or an article of what I think might help them, and just sort of a free value thing. If they want to work with me, cool. If not, they still have that thing to check back on.
So Ali, what were his struggles? Do you remember that he posted?
Offhand, I think one of the big ones was, so there's this whole concept of your perfect week, right? And basically, if you could design how you would spend your time, what would that actually look like? Like your perfect calendar, week, month, whatever. And one of the things he was struggling with was, I have the ability to create my perfect week, but I continue to not. I keep filling my week with a bunch of meetings or a bunch of other obligations that don't really align with how I want to show up and how I want to actually build and scale my business. And I don't know why. Like, why do I keep doing the shit that I claim I don't want to be doing? So that was a big thing we worked a lot on, and really kind of clarifying, fundamentally, what is, I do a lot of work around core value stuff. So like, what is your core value? And I want to say Ali, and he's talked about this too, is his big thing is he just wants to educate people to help them live happier, healthier, more fulfilling lives, whatever it looks like for him. So like for him, he's a big productivity guy, right? He wrote a book on it. His YouTube channel is a lot about that. But for him, productivity isn't a means in and of itself. It is a means to an end, right? Of like being productive so you can focus, spending your time on what actually matters so that you can go out and live your life, right? Not just how can I do 100 things as quickly as possible, but like how can I do the few things that matter so that I can go and live my life? So that's why Ali does a lot of the productivity stuff. So that was a big thing we talked about, was like, how can you clarify what actually matters? And then what are goals that you can create that progressively move you closer to a life aligned with that? And then what are the goals that seem helpful, but actually move you further away from a life aligned with those core values? So that's a lot of the work that we did.
This is a little bit of a segue, but I would hate to be a productivity guy because then you just have to be productive like the rest of your life. Like if you're known as the productivity guy, like you can't not be productive, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's sort of like, Ryan Holiday talks about how a lot of people assume he's like this hyper stoic guy all the time. He was like, one of the reasons I love stoicism is because I'm not the most stoic person. Like I try to embody that. These are my reminders and things, but I'm not perfect by any means. And I think most people who are like known in the productivity space are like, look, I'm not perfect all the time. Like I am very frequently not productive. However, when I am, these are the things that I'm doing. So I'm also creating this content to remind myself of what I need to be doing.
Yeah. For those listening, I would never describe myself as a productive person. Like, and I've never even like seeked out, is that the right word? Sought out. Sought out like productivity. It's just like, to me, it's almost like a burden, like trying to do the most amount of work in the shortest period of time places this like unnecessary stress on your life.
Very
like
much.
If you could just be okay with things taking longer and doing less, then life is pretty good.
Well, no, like the difference between being effective and being efficient, right? I would rather be effective. Like efficient is how can I do 100 things as quickly as possible? Right. Effective is how can I clarify what 3 things actually matter and move the needle? Let me just do those. And let me prioritize those above everything else without getting distracted. Because those are the 3 things. If I get nothing else done, I will make meaningful progress.
Yeah. So when you worked with Ali, like you said you would just find inspiration, kind of like ideation for him to go down this pathway to solve these problems, or what does coaching actually look like?
Yeah. So one of the most common things that because again, I'm a psychologist, so all of my stuff is around mindset and prioritizing strategies, that kind of stuff. One of the most common things that in general, a lot of founders and entrepreneurs really struggle with kind of comes down to limiting beliefs and just sort of like our own personal narratives. The majority of us know what we want, or we know what we need to do to get the thing we want, but we kind of bullshit ourselves of like, well, I really want to do this, but what will other people think? Other people will judge me, or maybe I am unworthy of success, or I need to get this thing first, then I can go over here and do the thing I really want to do, right? Or what if I'm not smart enough? What if this? Well, like all the imposter syndrome, perfectionism, all that stuff. Those are typically the things that hold us back. We think lack of money, lack of resources, lack of intelligence is a real reason we're not getting the things we claim to want. But that is very rarely the case, right? Especially with internet and stuff now, dude, there are very, very low barriers to entry, especially for entrepreneurs, right? But yet, how many people do you know who are entrepreneurs? They talk about it on and on and on, but they never take action. And that typically comes down to fear. So a lot of the work that I do with the business owners I work with is either how can we identify and overcome these limiting beliefs, or how can we clarify what actually matters to you and then figure out where's the disconnect. You claim this is important to you, but your life and your business aren't aligned with it. Why? Those are the big, like the mental blocks, are usually what we work through.
Why do you think most people are lying to themselves?
I don't think that they're intentionally lying to themselves. I think it's just much easier to pull out an excuse of the reason I haven't achieved this, or the reason I'm not doing this thing is because of this external, obstacle that I don't have any control over. And because I pick something I don't have control over, that gives me a reason as to why I can't change it. But if instead you took ownership and you said, okay, there may be things out of my control, but what is within my control? Let me get hyper clear on this. Now I can take action. It's really hard to take ownership and to call yourself on your own bullshit. And we all struggle with this to some degree because you have to admit your faults. And you have to admit that, well, maybe it's nobody else's fault but yours, which is great if you can do that, because now you're like, oh, well, if I can just learn how to get out of my own way, I can gain huge traction. But I think that's why just we don't like feeling guilty. We don't like feeling like something's our fault. So we reflexively find reasons and other things to blame outside of us.
Yeah. So I look at myself, and I look at frequently. I'll look at incredible talent, whether it be like Ryan Holiday or Elon Musk or James Clear, who have accomplished great things, and I see what they do and how they do it. And the one thing I've kind of been struggling with is like, what if I am legitimately dumber than my capabilities? How do you handle that where people have expectations that exceed their capabilities? Because certainly, I mean, like, let's be real. That's a true thing, right? Not everyone can be LeBron James in basketball. Not everyone can be Elon Musk in business. What do you do for those kind of situations where you have peak capabilities?
I actually think that intelligence after a certain point can be a hindrance because you overthink everything. You're really good at problem solving. And here's part of the issue too, is like entrepreneurship fundamentally is about identifying problems and creating solutions. So when you're smart, you're really good at finding problems to solve. The issue is there are always more problems. There are an infinite number of problems. So if you are prone to being really good at finding problems, it's really easy to get paralyzed in all those problems, right? And then second guess yourself or go down all these YouTube rabbit holes trying to find the perfect, setup or whatever, perfect microphone software or whatever. So a lot of my smartest friends, like classically smart friends, really struggle because all they do is sit around and think, and they think, when I can find a perfect plan that I can't poke holes in, then I'll move forward. But that perfect plan doesn't exist, right? Versus I know so many more successful entrepreneurs who they might be intelligent, but on like a bell curve, like actual like IQ type stuff, which I don't necessarily agree with, but they would probably fall within the average.
Right.
They just don't overthink. So you can be super smart. You just have to find ways, put bumpers on yourself to not overthink things. Because and it's almost like a cliche, like on Twitter/X is like, there are plenty of mediocre people who are outperforming you right now because they're not overthinking it, right? So I think that's a big thing. One of the people I know from years ago, he was like this, I don't even know, like this construction tycoon kind of person. He was really good at like home renovations and things. He went by the name Mud. And he was just like good old boy, wore a hat, always, just whatever you're, like boss hog kind of thing. And he went by Mud. He wasn't that intelligent. He was really good about finding the right people. And he was, quote unquote street smart, but he wasn't classically, a genius. He was just really good at like, well, this is the one thing I do real good. I'm gonna find a couple people who are real good at what they do. And then I'm just going to let them do it. So finding ways of accessing leverage can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, like this is a thought I've had as well. Is like you're looking for someone who's more intelligent than you. Like, how do you know whether they're legitimately more intelligent than you or they're a better bullshitter and they're fooling you over?
And that is a huge issue with hiring and scaling a company, right? Of like, how do you figure out your SOPs and things like for hiring, right? Yeah. I don't do that. Like most of my stuff is like solopreneur type stuff. However, what I will say is, to an extent, most of the time, especially early on, you need to know most of the things that you're doing, right? Like even with this, right? Like I would wager you have at least a passing understanding of editing and sound stuff and whatever, right? Like even something as simple as like you turn the AC off beforehand, right? That's a rookie mistake to leave it on, right? We've all been there, right? And you're just like, I can't fix this in post, right? So you have to pick up a little bit of everything early on. But then you're like, okay, let me just find somebody, even if they aren't as good as me yet, as long as they have the raw talent that I can, potentially train them up on. But more importantly, them spending 3 hours doing this is 3 hours I don't have to spend doing this, right? We can increase the quality over time. I think that is a big thing. As long as you know enough to know if somebody's bullshitting, because you're like, no, like I know how to edit, I know how to do this and that. You're full of shit. Right. If you know enough, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, I would also add, like, from my perspective, going back to what you originally said, is like a lot of times action's better than no action. So make the hire that you think is the best. Ideally, the hire is not going to jeopardize your business, or you don't allow it to jeopardize your business. And then you see, is it actually better or not? Is it hitting your goals and your ideas? If so, then good hire. If not, maybe wasn't the right hire, or maybe they need more resources.
That and like, there's a guy here, Noah Kagan.
Yeah.
Big time entrepreneur at Sumo. He just put out a book, $1 Million Weekend, I think. Noah recently talked about how he hired this high schooler. High schooler's name, his name's Jay Yang. Jay's awesome. Like he's kind of blown up on Twitter and LinkedIn and things, but Jay's super cool because the way Jay ended up getting a job with Noah. And this applies both to people trying to look for jobs or opportunities and also people trying to hire. Most of us, our DMs are full of shitty cold pitches, right? And, hey, I'll do this for you. I'll do this. Like, do you want like X, 5 leads a day? Do you want to make 10K MRR? Like all this stupid shit, right? And it's just a pitch. What Jay did instead, he sent Noah a pitch deck of here's where you're at. Here's exactly how I could help you and the general, metrics of how this would increase, right? And he was like, this is my portfolio. Here's what I've already done. Here's how I've grown all of these accounts, their newsletters, their Twitter, their LinkedIn, whatever. Here's how I've grown mine. Here's exactly step by step how I would do this for you and your company. And Noah hired him for starting him out with like 150K a year, which this is all like on Twitter, like you can see it. And it's just like, that's what
out of high school.
Jay just graduated high school,
and he paid him 150.
Jay graduated high school at the beginning of May. So he got this job while still a high school senior. But the fact like Jay built a track record and he was like, look, not only is this what I want to do for you, here is how I will do that. That if I'm hiring somebody, I'm going to hire the person who has the track record and shows me their portfolio and specifically walks me through everything, rather than the person who cold DMs me was like, hey, I had this really cool pitch. Care if I send it over? Fuck it, I'm not even going to respond. Right. That I think is how you really, really stand out.
So in my 12 years of business, no one's ever done that to me. So like, how do I get people, giving me nice decks of, how they should, I've gotten like tips here and there, but never like from the perspective of, I want to work at Beard Brand. Here's like my vision for it. Or maybe one time I did get it and it was just like so wrong and like so like not well thought out that I'm like,
Well, that's part of it, right? It's so rare. That's why if you do it, you stand out.
Yeah.
Right. And again, like as an entrepreneur, like as a business owner, that person will stand out to you, right? Because like you said, you're like, it hasn't happened. It may have happened once and it was half-assed, right?
Yeah.
If you had somebody who took that initiative and really put together a really good presentation with data to back it up, with a track record to back it up, that would be an instant hire, or at least an instant probationary hire.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's so rare.
Yeah. And you're going to find a role for that kind of person. Like, let's say they're trying to get in as a growth marketer. You have a growth marketer. Like, you're going to find a spot for that type of talent because you just know they'll be an effective part.
It's that work ethic and that bias toward action. Like that is so hard to cultivate. The skills and everything else you can teach afterward, but that basic drive, that's really what a lot of people are looking for.
So let's dig into that a little more. Do you think it is inherent to people to be self-motivated and have that drive, or do you think it is something you can learn?
This is like a whole nature nurture thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that obviously it's a combination, right? I think that there are plenty of people initially with drive, but then that drive is either not nurtured or is outright stamped out, right? Some people are able to rekindle it as they get older and they get out of less supportive environments. I don't see it working the other way though. I don't see how it works where somebody has zero drive, zero whatever, and then magically like tricks themselves into getting it because they read all the motivational books and follow all the gurus and things. I don't see that. But at the same time, man, I deeply believe that humans at their core are entrepreneurial in nature. You may not become an entrepreneur, but we naturally want to identify problems and create solutions, even in some small scale, right? So I think most of us do have that drive. It's just a matter of recognizing it, accessing it, and nurturing it as we get older. And really, like, again, it's a cliche, man, but like the whole idea of, the 5 people you surround yourself with, most often you kind of become the average of. One of the reasons my girlfriend and I moved to Austin was for that, right? Like most recently we were in Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville's fine. I don't drink and I don't give a shit about horses. So like Louisville just didn't have a whole lot for us. There's a great jiu-jitsu gym. Shout out to Chewy and Derby City MMA. But outside of that, there just wasn't much for us specifically. And I realized most of the people, like the creators and entrepreneurs I had met like on Twitter and things, were here. And even if they didn't live here, they came through here all the time, like for conventions and things. Being able to, one, on the internet, surround myself with certain people, but especially now being able to physically surround myself with people has really, really helped me. Cause like, dude, I grew up on like food stamps and public housing level poor, right? Like Oprah has this joke, this whole thing of like, they were so poor they couldn't afford the R, so they were po. Like, I remember getting like Thanksgiving, like turkey donations from churches and stuff. Like that's how poor we were growing up. So like I didn't have entrepreneurs that I could look up to. I didn't know anybody who made more than like, I mean, dude, middle class, when you're poor, middle class looks wealthy. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have those people. And even when I went to grad school and I was, the first in my family to get a 4-year degree, let alone a doctorate, I still wasn't really surrounded by people who were successful business owners. They were successful like directors or, therapists or whatever, but not business owners. Not until I got on Twitter and met really cool people and then moved here and got to hang out with really cool people did I really access not only the drive that I had always had, but also the real models of, oh, this isn't a fantasy. I know somebody specifically who has made this work. That kind of turns that idea into a reality, like a based in reality goal. And that's huge.
I think what's interesting about your story is like you go into a field where you trade your time for money, which is common in a lot of roles, lawyers, doctors, psychologists, therapists, coaches. There's a ton of roles out there. How did you make that transition from, like effectively trading your time for money to productizing it and building a business around that as something that could stand on their own? And like, what was that switch in your head?
Yeah. So getting fired really helped. Yeah. So when I did therapy, I was what's called a behavioral health provider, which is just what they call psychologists in the medical field. I was specializing in addiction treatment, working in rural Appalachia. So high need, there aren't a lot of psychologists who specialize in that for those areas. So I had peak job security, doctoral level psychologists, addiction treatment, rural Appalachia. You can't really get much more secure than that.
Are you saying there's a lot of alcoholics in Appalachia?
There's a lot of heroin and pills and meth. Okay. Yeah. That's not even anecdotal. Like, there's research on that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was a kind of a joke. It's clearly a hard place to live.
It's beautiful. It's just, yes. There's, beautiful place, beautiful people. Economically is a dumpster fire, and access to resources. But, so during COVID, I had negotiated a remote telehealth position so that we could move to Louisville. So my girlfriend get her PhD, and, 2 months, I was actually going to quit my job, but they were like, well, why don't you just stay with us and you can go remote. Cool. 2 months into that new contract, I got an email. It was like, hey, in 30 days, you're fired. So I tried to talk to the boss and they were like, look, patients love you. Coworkers love you. Your numbers are great. You're seeing enough people. You're great at your job. We're just pulling everybody back into the clinic. And because you're exclusively remote, you're fired.
Yeah.
The day I got that email, we had a staff meeting. And in the staff meeting, they were like, we don't have enough behavioral health providers. We need more. And I'm like, you all literally just fired me today, but you need more. Well, we need more for this clinic over here. I'm like, I could have done that, but there wasn't a conversation. So I had 30 days notice. And the issue with the therapy world in the US is I can be anywhere in the world, but you as my therapy patient have to physically be in the state I'm licensed in during that call, even though it's through Zoom. So you had to I'm licensed in West Virginia. I was living in Kentucky. I couldn't find another remote job out of West Virginia, wasn't willing to move back. And in order to get licensed in Kentucky would have taken 4 to 6 months because the board only meets every other month and they were backed up for the next 2 meetings. It was a whole lot of red tape. So I was like, I have 30 days and 3 paychecks worth of runway to figure out my life because I spent 12 years getting this doctorate and I literally can't practice therapy anymore. What do I do with my life? So which I feel is like a lot of entrepreneurs are like, shit hit the fan and I had to figure it out.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, how can I take all this knowledge I have and apply it to something else? I'd always kind of wanted to be a writer. I'd always wanted to, my original major was business management. So I always kind of been intrigued by business and things. So I ended up getting certified as an executive coach, which coaching is like a 4-letter word in the therapy world. Because coaching is unregulated. You can be a 14-year-old with a TikTok and call yourself a life coach. Like, is a whole thing, right? But I decided to do that because I realized the therapy world defines wellness as the absence of illness. So my job as a therapist wasn't to make you healthy. It was to help you become subclinical. So you no longer warranted a diagnosis. But just because you're not sick doesn't mean you're healthy, right? Yeah. Coaching is much more about how can we take somebody who's relatively healthy and help them flourish, thrive, self-actualize, whatever term you want to put on it. How can we really help them grow into their potential? So I was like, well, I've had all this training. I could do that, but I literally wasn't allowed to because the insurance wouldn't cover it. So got the certification. And then I was like, cool. How do I set up an LLC? How do I create a WordPress page? Like, how do I do that? And I just did a lot of Googling and YouTubing. I ended up meeting up with some entrepreneurs. I just met them on Twitter who were really, really kind and really helpful. Shout out to like Nick Wignall, Dan Coe, and some of the other people. They kind of, like we became friends. They kind of took me under the wing and they just kind of showed me the ropes. And, I tell people all the time, like I just kind of bumblefuck my way through entrepreneurship because I never had a background in it. It's just self-taught and putting out what I consider valuable content that attracts friends and an audience and customers and things, and then just kind of iterating. Like it's that simple and that complicated. Just start, then iterate.
Yeah. I want to circle back to drugs.
Cool.
In particular, I know in the therapy world, like mushrooms, psilocybin, or was it psilocybin, something like that. And ayahuasca are used as therapies for people to overcome, I guess, like past trauma or past events in their life. What is your take on that, those options and experiences for people?
Yeah. So I think that from like a clinical, like research perspective, it seems understudied right now. But the other thing is same thing with weed, right? Apparently, and again, I am no longer in this world, so feel free to fact check all this later. But from my understanding, with all the research on weed, you can only get your weed from like 1 or 2 like companies if you're going to study it. So like if you're in California, you literally can't go to a dispensary and buy that weed and then study it. You have to get it from this 1 or 2 companies.
Government weed.
Yeah. You can only study government weed and there's only like 1 or 2 strains of it. So like all the research is so confined to these 1 or 2 strains, but it's like, okay, but like my dad is huge on weed. And he's used it for pain management my entire life. I remember being in like high school health class and the teacher, I was like, yeah, weed helps with pain. And my teacher was like, your dad's full of shit. He's just a stoner. But now people are like, oh no, it's actually really, really good. And like for neuropathy and all this other stuff, we never had the research for it. And we still don't really. It's the same thing with psychedelics and mushrooms and all these other things is like, and ketamine, all these other things. I think that as long as it is researched and done well, I think it can be a huge unlock for people, because the issue is like, because therapists are like, oh, it's like they're coming for our jobs. Look, if somebody can treat their treatment-resistant, drug-resistant PTSD with a couple treatments of ketamine or mushrooms, or they just take a maintenance dose of mushrooms every day or throughout the week or whatever, if that helps them have a quality of life, well, now if they still want therapy, they can come to you, and now you can use your actual training through talk therapy, psychotherapy, to help them develop coping skills, to help them develop insights that drugs aren't going to give you. So the drugs may help rewire some, your brain chemistry and things, and that's awesome. But it isn't inherently going to give you a lot of the other benefits you get from actual talk therapy. So I see them much more as complementary rather than competition. I think it's great if we can do it right.
There's a new, I want to say like a movement, or there's someone writing books. I forget who it is, but it's basically about how society is almost like over therapized.
Oh, bad therapy?
Bad therapy. What is your take on that as a therapist or a psychologist?
Yeah. So I rarely rant on line. This is one of my rants recently. So, caveat, I have not read the book. But I did watch a podcast interview she did with Shane Parrish of Farnham Street, because I love Farnham Street. Basically, from that interview, her premise, one, she's not a psychologist or a therapist. She's a journalist, which means she has zero clinical training or insight. The main things that she said in the interview was it wasn't therapy was the issue so much as therapists are the issue. Well, she said it was bad therapy, but she conflated them. So what she claimed was that if you send your kids to therapy, the therapist is going to actively undermine your parental authority, and they're going to try to make the kids dependent on therapy and all this other stuff. So for me, as somebody, I am no longer in the therapy world. There is a ton of bullshit with the therapy world, which is why I left it. So I am not a champion for the therapy world as it currently is. I have no dog in this fight. However, I did a lot of child therapy before I specialized in addiction treatment. That isn't what therapy looks like. Like, therapy is very much collaborating with the kid or the patient or whoever of like, what do you need? My job is to make myself obsolete so that you no longer need therapy. The issue is, especially like in that scenario with kids can't leave their situation. Adults typically can. So a kid may have ongoing therapy because it's like 90% of the time, the reason your kid is in therapy is because of you as a parent. Sucks to say, nobody wants to hear that, but that is frequently, and you may be the 10% that it isn't. Cool. But it's frequently the issue. We would have kids all the time who were like, the parent would like, oh, this kid's awful. And then as soon as the parent would leave the room, kid was fine. And then when I watched the parent the kid, it's atrocious, right? So most of child therapy is actually parent training a lot of times. Your therapist isn't trying to keep you coming to therapy. Now, certain types of therapy are long-term, and those I disagree with, right? Like a lot of like the psychoanalytic, psychodynamic stuff. No, I'm trained in CBT.
CBT, cognitive behavior therapy.
Correct. Yeah, CBT is meant to be short-term.
It's almost like I call it the coaching of therapy, where it's like helping people identify their problems and then how they work through those problems.
Very much. CBT is very problem and solution focused, right? Of like, how can we identify the ways you think and the ways you behave that are holding you back and help you develop better ones. That's all CBT is. So yes, I understand the hesitations people have with therapy. And I do agree that it looks like we over-pathologize a lot of things. I think most, and I like TikTok and things, right? Most of my friends now are convinced they have ADHD and autism. Most of them don't have it, right? You may. Statistically, they are exceedingly rare. The issue is I'll see memes and things all the time of, do you struggle to focus for 8 hours uninterrupted? You might have ADHD.
It's like, who can do that?
Does a constant buzzing irritate you? You're probably autistic. And it's like, that's everybody. It irritates the shit out of everybody. So you have a lot of non-clinicians making content for non-clinicians. So everybody's like self-diagnosing as well. And it's easy enough to find a psychiatrist or a therapist who will be like, yeah, sure, here you go. You can have your autism diagnosis. You can go off and do whatever. But we have seen an overcorrection, and I am waiting for the day where people can just be like, even if just be weird. Like, you don't have to put a name to it. Like, it's important to have a name for autism or ADHD or other things if you need services, or if that helps you reconcile, like, oh, this isn't a character flaw. This is my legitimate wiring. Cool. But don't wrap your identity up in it, and don't use it as a crutch.
Yeah, I think like I've had a few people who have been diagnosed as adults ADHD, and I think probably entrepreneurs are a little bit higher than the average population for that.
Anecdotally, I've seen that, yes, 100%.
And what I would imagine is like, for me, as a quote unquote ideas guy entrepreneur, like I don't mind like, kind of drift into the wind. Like I don't feel like it's holding me back, but there are people out there who feel like they're held back because they're not able to stay as focused for as long as they want, or they're off on different tangents, or they get disrupted at work and they can't get back into the flow because it's just harder. And then utilizing medication to help them enhance their performance. So I think there is no right or wrong on your own endeavor. I want to circle back like to, you said bad parenting. What is the obvious bad parenting that people are doing that they could improve their children's behavior?
Yeah, so obviously it'll depend on like the age of the kid, right? But the biggest thing is rather than punishing bad behaviors, how can you reinforce good behaviors, right? What many parents who struggle, what they typically all do is when their kid is behaving, they leave them alone. And when their kid is misbehaving, they give them all the attention, especially with younger kids, right? The issue is, especially with younger kids, a lot of times your kid just wants attention and they don't necessarily differentiate good from bad attention. They just know, oh, now I'm getting all of mommy's attention or all of daddy's attention, right? So like if you walk by and your kid is like coloring in their coloring book, you're just like, oh, don't spook them.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're being good. Don't spook them. But as soon as little Johnny starts coloring on the wall, you're like, no, Johnny, don't do that. Don't do that. Like, come here. What did I tell you? I have your attention now. Right. And again, like as adults, we're like, well, that makes no sense. Like, why would they want to be yelled at? They don't want to be yelled at. They just want attention. So how can you say, like when little Johnny is coloring correctly, how you can be like, oh, you're doing such a good job coloring in your coloring book, right? Can daddy come over and color with you? Like little things like that go a long way, especially for younger kids. As they get older, the biggest mistake I see a lot of parents make is not allowing their kids within safe parameters to have autonomy and the ability to explore and experiment and things and have a little bit of control, right? Because like rebelliousness is really normal and developmentally normal for a lot of teens. But if you're like a drill sergeant, you're like, it is my way or the highway. And I think a lot of us, if you grew up like that or you had a parent or grandparent like that, you remember how much friction there was and how much that got in the way of the relationship. And not that you have to be friends with your kids, but your sanity and your kids as they develop, everybody will be much better off if you can find ways of supporting and offering structure without being like a complete dictator to your kids. The best way I've kind of heard it is remember that you're not raising kids, you're raising future adults. And I think because like parents talk to their kids and adults a lot of times talk to kids so disrespectfully versus how they talk to other adults, right? So that's one thing I would kind of look at too is like the thing you're about to say to this kid, would you ever say that to an adult? Well, no, because an adult would punch me in the mouth. Then you probably shouldn't say it that way to the kid, right? But we frequently were just like, you completely either have to fully agree with me and do exactly what I say, or you're going to get punished. That isn't how we interact in day-to-day life. So why would we create that environment for a kid?
Yeah, I think parenting is a hard thing, especially trying to run a business. So where can people follow you, learn more?
CoreyWilkspsyd.com, CoreyWilkspsyd. You can just look up Corey Wilks or Corey Wilkspsyd. I'm there, Twitter, LinkedIn, everywhere.
It's X now.
X, yes, yes.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. This has been another e-commerce conversations. Cheers. Keep on growing.